The city of Medina was cloaked in a sorrow it had never known before. A heavy stillness hung in the air, broken only by the hushed murmurs of those who walked its streets with bowed heads and tear-filled eyes. This was no ordinary sadness. It was the weight of a farewell that no heart was ready to bear. The messenger of Allah, the man who had transformed their lives, their homes, their very purpose, was gravely ill. Inside the modest home of Aisha, his beloved wife, the final moments of the most blessed soul were quietly unfolding. Outside, companions gathered in anxious silence, their eyes fixed on the doorway that had so often opened to reveal the radiant face of their prophet. Now it remained closed, guarding the final hours of a life that had been lived in pure devotion to God and in boundless mercy to mankind. The prophet had spent his life serving others. He had endured hunger, hardship, exile, and war so that the message of truth could reach even the most distant hearts. And now, as his noble frame weakened from the relentless fever, the people of Medina found themselves lost in a sea of grief. They remembered his smile, his wisdom, his courage, and his kindness. They remembered the way he stood in prayer deep into the night, weeping for the guidance and forgiveness of his ummah. The city that had once echoed with his words of hope and guidance now felt quiet, subdued, as if even the wind hesitated to disturb the final peace of Allah's messenger. As shadows lengthened and the air thickened with anticipation, every soul in Medina knew that something eternal was drawing to a close. The one who had been their light was preparing to return to the divine. Inside the humble room of Aisha, the atmosphere was heavy with love, sorrow, and reverence. The Prophet Muhammad lay resting on her lap, his body frail from the relentless illness that had gripped him for days. His once luminous face, which had radiated strength and compassion, was now pale and drawn, yet his eyes still held the same depth of kindness that had comforted so many. The fever had not broken, and waves of pain washed over him, sometimes so severe that he would lose consciousness, only to awaken moments later and whisper, "Have the people prayed?" Even as death approached, his concern was not for himself, but for his ummah. His final breaths were still wrapped in love and responsibility. Aisha, tender and composed despite the aching in her heart, gently wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead with her own hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from knowing the end was near. She could feel it in the silence between his breaths, in the stillness of the room, where time itself seemed to slow down. The only sound was the faint, labored rise and fall of his chest, as though the very air mourned the struggle of each breath he took. Her eyes never left his face. She watched his lips move in hushed supplication, whispering prayers she could barely hear. Though he said little, the weight of what was unspoken filled the space like a presence. Outside, the companions waited, many of them unable to contain their tears. They had seen him lead in battle with courage, heard his voice recite revelation with unmatched beauty, watched him console the grieving, care for the orphan, and teach with divine wisdom. But now they stood helpless, unable to stop the approach of what they dreaded most. Fatima, his beloved daughter, sat near his feet, her heart breaking at the sight of the father who had always protected her now, fading before her eyes. She whispered through tears, "Oh, my father, what a painful trial this is for you." And in a voice laced with both love and serenity, he replied, "There is no pain upon your father after today, O Fatima." Those words, tender and eternal, pierced the hearts of all who were present. The room remained still, every heartbeat echoing with the heaviness of grief. Fatima sat close to her father's feet, her eyes swollen from tears, her heart aching in ways words could not capture. She looked at the man who had lifted her as a child, who had comforted her in sorrow, who had taught her the true meaning of mercy and strength. Now he lay before her, his breath shallow, his body weakened, but his presence still wrapped in divine dignity. She could not bear the thought of losing him. Her tears fell freely as she whispered to herself, to the heavens, to anything that might listen, "Oh, my father, don't leave us." Suddenly, a soft, unfamiliar knock interrupted the quiet. It was gentle, respectful, unlike any knock they had heard before. It did not come with urgency or impatience, but with a calm authority that made the heart pause. Fatima wiped her tears quickly and rose to her feet. She moved to the door with a sense of unease she couldn't explain. Opening it slowly, she saw a man cloaked in white standing before her. His presence was otherworldly. There was no familiarity in his face, yet something in his gaze made her tremble. He carried no weapon, no scroll, but his presence alone filled the doorway like the silence before a storm. He lowered his head slightly and spoke in a voice that was soft, deep, and unwavering. "Peace be upon you, O household of the Messenger of Allah. May I enter?" Fatima hesitated, her breath caught between fear and awe. She had welcomed many to inquire about her father during his illness, but no one like this had come before. Her heart pounded in her chest, not out of dread, but from a knowing that this visit was unlike any other. She whispered, "My father is unwell. He cannot receive visitors at this moment." The man did not object. He simply bowed his head and stood in silence as if waiting, not for permission, but for destiny. Fatima returned to her father's side, her hands cold and trembling. Kneeling beside him once more, she whispered, "Oh, my father, there is a man at the door seeking permission to enter. I have never seen him before." The prophet slowly opened his eyes, and a faint smile softened his lips. In a voice barely audible, yet filled with meaning, he said, "O Fatima, do you know who that is? He is the angel of death. He does not seek permission from anyone, except me." Fatima gasped. Her breath caught in her throat as her father's words sank in. The angel of death, the one all souls must meet. But here, in this moment, in this room filled with love and heartbreak, he had come not as a shadow, but as a guest asking for permission. Her hands trembled as she returned to the door. With eyes full of tears and a heart heavy with sorrow, she opened it once more. The angel stood still, his expression calm, but the reverence in his presence was undeniable. She stepped aside in silence, granting him passage. Azrael entered, each step echoing like a sacred beat of time, drawing to its most hallowed moment. His gaze remained low, never rising to meet the prophet directly. He approached with a humility that even the angels rarely displayed, for he knew he was standing in the presence of the most beloved of Allah's creation. He came to the prophet's side, and in a voice like flowing water, both powerful and gentle, he said, "O Messenger of Allah, your Lord has sent me to you with a choice. If you wish, I shall take your soul with gentleness now. But if you wish, you may remain in this world until the time you choose to leave." The room fell silent. Even the air itself seemed to wait. Outside, the companions still stood in anxious quiet, unaware that a divine conversation was unfolding just beyond the walls. Inside, Aisha held her breath. Fatima clutched her chest, and Azrael bowed his head as the weight of the moment settled over them all. The prophet closed his eyes. He had given his life to this mission. Every breath, every step, every tear shed had been for the sake of Allah and for the salvation of humanity. He had endured rejection in Taif, fought at Badr, wept at Uhud, and conquered Mecca with mercy in his heart. He had buried those he loved, prayed until his feet swelled, and carried the final revelation of the Almighty. Now he was being given a choice, a gift no other human had been granted. He opened his eyes slowly, the light of surrender and longing gleaming within them. He looked upwards toward the heavens, where his true home awaited. And then, with a smile so peaceful, it brought tears to the eyes of all who witnessed it, he whispered, "I choose the companionship of the Most High. I choose Allah." Azrael bowed deeply. There was no protest, no hesitation. The decision had been made. The beloved of Allah had chosen to return. The angel had been honored to ask, and now honored to obey. In that sacred room, history paused. The soul that had illuminated the earth was ready to return to its divine source. The choice was not one of sorrow, but of fulfillment, a return to the one who had sent him, loved him, and now called him home. Azrael stood with a reverence unlike any he had shown before, his task before him, but his heart heavy with awe. Never before had he taken the soul of one so loved by the Creator, one whose entire existence had been a mercy to the worlds. As he prepared to fulfill his duty, every movement was slow, careful, filled with a tenderness unknown to death itself. The companions outside waited, unaware of what was happening behind the closed door, while inside, hearts shattered under the weight of love and impending farewell. The Prophet, though his body was frail and breath faint, radiated a peace that wrapped the room like a warm, quiet prayer. His lips moved softly once more, a whisper that would echo through eternity. "O Allah," he said, "ease the pain of my ummah at the time of death." Even in his final breaths, his concern was not for himself, not for his own comfort, but for his followers, for those who would come after him, for the hearts that would carry his message forward. This final supplication was not for relief from pain, but a plea of compassion for those who would walk the path he had illuminated. Azrael began his task, and the world seemed to pause. It was said that no soul had ever been taken with such gentleness, such honor. The angel approached as if embracing a precious treasure, lifting the soul of the Prophet in the softest, most delicate way. No scream, no resistance, only a silent assent, as if the very heavens reached down to cradle him. Aisha felt the stillness first. The rise and fall of his chest no longer came. The warmth of his breath was gone. She looked down at his noble face, still radiant in death, and her tears fell without restraint. She held him close, whispering his name as if the force of her love could call him back. Fatima stood frozen, unable to believe that the man who had carried her through every sorrow, who had guided the world with divine light, was now gone from it. Her sobs filled the room, her heart breaking in a way that would never fully heal. The silence in the room grew louder than any cry. The Prophet of Allah had returned to his Lord, his soul had ascended. And though his body remained before them, lifeless yet still noble, everyone knew the world had changed forever. The light had dimmed on earth, but it now burned ever brighter in the heavens. Outside the house of Aisha, the companions waited with hearts gripped by anxiety. They had seen the signs, sensed the nearness of the hour, yet none of them were truly ready for the moment that was now upon them. When the door finally opened and the news was whispered from one trembling mouth to another, it spread like a wildfire that no soul could escape. The messenger of Allah had passed away. The words cut deeper than any blade, piercing the hearts of men who had once stood fearless in battle. Silence turned to gasps, gasps to cries, and soon the courtyard of Medina was filled with a sorrow that shattered even the strongest among them. Umar ibn al-Khattab, the mighty, the unwavering, the one known for his strength and resolve, could not accept what he had heard. His eyes wide with disbelief, he stepped forward and unsheathed his sword. His voice trembled with rage and anguish as he cried out, "Whoever says that Muhammad has died, I will strike him down. He has not died. He has gone to meet his Lord, just as Musa went to meet his Lord, and he will return." His body shook, his grip on his sword tightening not out of violence, but out of desperate denial. He could not imagine a world without the Prophet. How could the earth still turn? How could the sun dare rise again? Then, through the cries and confusion, a calm and steady voice broke through the chaos. Abu Bakr, the closest friend of the Prophet, the man who had walked beside him through every trial, stepped forward. His face was pale, his heart shattered, but his faith unshaken. He entered the room where the Prophet's body lay, uncovered his face, and gently kissed his forehead. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he whispered, "O Messenger of Allah, you were beautiful in life, and you are beautiful in death." He then stepped outside, raised his voice, and recited the eternal words of the Quran. Muhammad is no more than a messenger. Many messengers have passed before him. If he dies or is killed, will you turn back on your heels? As the words of Surah Ali Imran echoed through the hearts of the companions, reality set in. The Prophet had returned to his Lord, but the message remained, eternal and unshakable. In the quiet that followed the Prophet's passing, Medina seemed to hold its breath. The sun continued to shine, but the warmth felt distant, as if even the heavens were in mourning. Inside the home of Aisha, those closest to the Prophet gathered around him, their hearts shattered, their eyes wet with tears. The task ahead was the most sacred and most painful one they had ever faced, preparing the body of the most beloved man to ever walk the earth for burial. His blessed body, though still and lifeless, radiated a peace that silenced the room. There was no panic, no rushing, only a solemn reverence. His uncle Abbas, his cousin Ali, and his devoted companions Usama and others stepped forward, their hands trembling as they touched him. They could barely believe what they were doing. How does one wash the body of the messenger of Allah without falling apart? Yet, through the pain, they performed their duty, honoring him with every movement, whispering prayers through their tears. They washed his body with the gentlest touch, as though fearful they might disturb the serenity on his face. With every pour of water, every stroke of the cloth, they were reminded of his teachings, his sacrifices, his love. The fragrance of musk filled the room, a scent more beautiful than anything they had ever known, as if even death honored the Prophet with its sweetest offerings. When the time for the funeral prayer came, no one stepped forward to lead. How could anyone stand before the Prophet in prayer? So, they prayed in groups silently, each person pouring out their sorrow in whispered supplication. There was no hurry, no order, only pure love guiding their steps. Men came in waves, each unwilling to say goodbye, each reluctant to leave the room where he rested. As the companions took turns, the atmosphere was filled with awe and grief. This was not just the passing of a leader or a teacher. This was the farewell of the mercy to the worlds. Even in death, his presence commanded humility, love, and unity. The room, the hearts, and the city bore witness to a moment that would forever echo through time. They were not merely preparing a body, they were laying to rest the heartbeat of their faith. When the time came to lower the Prophet Muhammad into the grave, every heart in Medina trembled. The weight of what they were about to do was almost too much to bear. The very hands that had once reached out in joy to greet him, that had held their swords beside him in battle, that had risen in prayer behind him, now had to carry his blessed body to its final resting place. The earth itself seemed to grieve as they prepared the grave inside the home of Aisha, the very room where he had spent his final days. It was only fitting that he be buried where he had lived his last moments, surrounded by love and tenderness. As the companions gently lifted his body, they moved slowly, carefully, as though time had slowed down for this sacred act. Their tears fell freely, yet they did not let their sorrow overcome their duty. The grave was not deep in the wilderness, nor marked by marble. It was simple, humble, a reflection of the life he had lived. But what it held was beyond anything this world could contain. When they placed him into the earth, the silence that followed was unlike any silence they had known. It was not empty, it was full of love, of sorrow, of reverence, and of history. Fatima stood nearby, her face pale, her eyes distant. Her body trembled as she watched her father, her protector, her guide, lowered into the soil. Her heart cried out in anguish, and through her tears she whispered, "How could the earth bear to cover you, O my father?" Her words were the echo of a daughter's love and the cry of a nation that felt orphaned. She would later say, with a grief etched into her soul, "After the death of the messenger of Allah, there was nothing left to bring joy to my heart." The companions who had fought by his side, who had broken bread with him, who had laughed and wept in his presence, now stood before his grave, their heads bowed, their spirits heavy. But in that grief was also clarity. The Prophet had left them, but his message remained. His teachings, his example, his mercy, they did not vanish with his final breath. They had been planted deep into the hearts of those who loved him. He had reminded them in his final days that death was not the end, that reunion awaited in the gardens of paradise, and that the mission must go on. No leader had been so deeply loved, and no farewell had felt so final. But even as the dust settled over his grave, something eternal had taken root. His light had not gone out, it had spread. In the way they prayed, in how they spoke to their children, in how they sought justice, showed compassion, forgave, and believed, he lived on. The prophet had returned to his Lord, and the heavens had welcomed their most honored guest. But the earth would never forget. His footsteps had walked its soil, his voice had called people to truth, his hands had lifted the downtrodden, and his smile had softened the hardest hearts. Medina would never be the same, the world would never be the same. But those who loved him would carry his legacy like a lantern in the darkness, lighting the path for all who came after. And so, even in death, the Prophet Muhammad continued to guide, to inspire, to lead until the end of time.